With the OSPF version 3 address families configuration, we can have one hierarchical configuration that contains our OSPF configurations for both IP version 4 and IP version 6 routing. And there's going to be a single database maintained. We can give a single command and we get information about both IPv4 and IPv6. And along with address families, we've got a new set of commands we can use for verification and troubleshooting. And the great news is we can still use our older commands. We could still say, for example, show IPv6 OSPF neighbor like we saw in our prior video. So just using address families doesn't mean that our older commands don't work, but now we've got a new set of commands. Instead of saying show IPv6 OSPF neighbor, we could say show OSPF v3 neighbor. And notice this gives us information about our different address families, one for IP version 4, one for IP version 6. Before we look at any more of these commands though, I want to show you and remind you what the address family configuration looks like. Let's do a show run pipe to section router OSPF v3. And we see that we've got this one hierarchical configuration structure, router OSPF v3 and a process ID of 1. I've given this a router ID of 10.2.2.2, and notice we've got two address families, one for IP version 4 unicast, one for IP version 6 unicast. And it's under these address families where we can configure the various OSPF parameters that we might want to tweak. For example, I said that area 1 is going to be a stub area, but that's only for IP version 6. Now let's take a look at some more commands we can use to get information from this combined database. Similar to the show IPv6 OSPF command we saw in our prior video, now we've got a show OSPF v3 command that's going to give us similar information. Now there's not a replacement for the show IP protocols and the show IPv6 protocols we saw in prior videos. There's not a show OSPF v3 replacement for that. We can still use those. If I want to look at my interfaces, I can say show OSPF v3 interface. Let's add the brief keyword, and we can see for different address families, IPv4, IPv6, I can see what interfaces are participating in specific OSPF areas. But notice we're all using the same process ID of 1. It's all under that single hierarchical configuration. If we want to get more information about a specific interface, we can do that. I can say show OSPF v3 interface and give an interface identifier. Let's say Fast Ethernet 0/0. And we can use this to get things like timer information, router ID information, OSPF network type information. To look at our neighbors, mentioned this one earlier, we can say show OSPF v3 neighbor, and we get to see both IPv4 and IPv6 address families. And also, if we want to look at our link state database, we can say show OSPF v3 database. And we first get to see the link state database for the IP version 4 address family. We'll scroll down toward the bottom. And here we see the IP version 6 address family with all of its LSAs. And that's a quick look at a handful of show commands we can use when we're verifying or troubleshooting OSPF version 3 using the address families configuration.